From the Caves and Jungles of Hindustan by Madame Blavatsky. Chapter 10. The Caves of Bagh. At 4 o'clock in the morning we crossed the Vagri and Gurna, or rather Kumkoloras Lokal, Shiva and Pavarti, probably following the bad example of the average mortal husband and wife. This divine couple were engaged in a quarrel even at this early hour of the day. They were frightfully rough, and our ferry, striking on something at the bottom, nearly upset us into the cold embrace of the god and his irate better half. Like all the cave temples of India, the Bagh Caverns are dug out of the middle of a vertical rock, with the intention, as it seemed to me, of testing the limits of human patience. Taking into consideration that such a height does not prevent either glamour or tigers reaching the caves, I cannot help thinking that the sole aim of the aesthetic builders was to tempt weak mortals into the sin of irritation by the inaccessibility of their airy abodes. 72 steps cut out in the rock and covered with thorny weeds and moss are the beginning of the ascent to the Bagh Caves. Footmarks, worn in the stone through centuries, spoke of the numberless pilgrims who had come here before us. The roughness of the steps with deep holes here and there and thorns added attractions to this ascent. Join to this a number of mountain springs exuding through the pores of the stone, and no one will be astonished if I say that we simply felt faint under the weight of life and our archaeological difficulties. The babu, who, taking off his slippers, scampered over the thorns as unconcernedly as if he had hoofs instead of vulnerable human heels, laughed at the helplessness of Europeans and only made us feel the worse. But on reaching the top of the mountain, we stopped grumbling, realizing at the first glance that we should receive our reward. We saw a whole enfilade of dark caves through regular square openings 6 feet wide. We felt awestruck with the gloomy majesty of this deserted temple. There was a curious ceiling over the square platform that once served as a veranda. There was also a portico with broken pillars hanging over our heads, and 2 rooms on each side, one with a broken image of some flat-nosed goddess and the other containing a Ganesha. But we did not stop to examine all this in detail. Ordering the torches to be lit, we stepped into the first hall. A damp breath, as of the tomb, met us. At our first word, we all shivered. A hollow, prolonged, echoing howl, dying away in the distance, shook the ancient vaults and made us all lower our voices to a whisper. The torch-bearers shrieked, "Devi, Devi," and kneeling in the dust, performed a fervent puja, P-U-J-A, in honor of the voice of the invisible goddess of the caves, in spite of the angry protestations of Narayan and of the god's warrior. The only light of the temple came from the entrance, and so 2/3 of it looked still gloomier by contrast. This hall, or central temple, is very spacious, 84 feet square, and 16 feet high. 24 massive pillars form a square, 6 pillars on each side, including the corner ones, and 4 in the middle to prop up the center of the ceiling, otherwise it could not be kept from falling, as the mass of the mountain which presses on it from the top is much greater than in Karli or Elephanta. There are at least 3 different styles in the architecture of these pillars. Some of them are grooved in spirals, gradually and imperceptibly changing from round to 16-sided, then octagonal and square. others plain for the first third of their height, gradually finished under the ceiling by the most elaborate display of ornamentation, which reminds one of the Corinthian style. The third, with a square plinth, plinth, and semicircular friezes. Taking it all in, they made the most original and graceful picture. Mr. Y, an architect by profession, assured us that he had never seen anything more striking. He said he could not imagine by the aid of what instruments the ancient builders could accomplish such wonders. The construction of the Bagh Caves, as well as all the cave temples in India, whose history is lost in the darkness of time, is ascribed by the European archaeologists to the Buddhists, and by the native tradition to the Pandu brothers, Pandu brothers. Indian paleography protests in every one of these new discoveries against the hasty conclusions of the Orientalists, and much may be said against the intervention of Buddhists in this particular case, but I shall indicate only one particular. The theory which declares that all the cave temples of India are of Buddhist origin are wrong. The Orientalists may insist as much as they choose on the hypothesis that the Buddhists became again idol worshippers. It will explain nothing and contradicts the history of both Buddhists and Brahmins. The Brahmins began persecuting and banishing the Buddhists precisely because they had begun a crusade against idol worship. The few Buddhist communities who remained in India and deserted the pure, though maybe for a shallow observer somewhat aesthetic teachings of Gautama Siddhartha, never joined Brahmanism, but coalesced with the Jainas, Jainas, and gradually became absorbed in them. Then why not suppose that if, amongst hundreds of Brahmanical gods, we find one statue of Buddha, it only shows that the masses of half-converts to Buddhism added this new god to the ancient Brahmanical temple. This would be much more sensible than to think that the Buddhists of the 2 centuries before and after the beginning of the Christian era dared to fill their temples with idols in defiance of the spirit of the reformer Gautama. The figures of Buddha are easily discerned in the swarm of heathen gods. Their position is always the same, with the palm of the right hand always turned upward, the blessing of the worshippers with 2 fingers. Blessing the worshippers with 2 fingers. Okay. We examined the most remarkable vihara, Vihara, of the so-called Buddhist temples, and never met with one statue of Buddha which could not have been added in a later epoch than the construction of the temple. It does not matter whether it was a year or 1,000 years later. Not being perfectly self-confident in this matter, we always took the opinion of Mr. Y, who, as I said before, was an experienced architect, and he invariably came to the conclusion that the Brahmanical idols formed a harmonic and genuine part of the whole, pillars, decorations, and the general style of the temple, whereas the statue of the Buddha was an additional and discordant patch. Out of 30 or 40 caves of Ellora, all filled with idols, there is only one, the one called the Temple of the Trilokas, which contains nothing but statues of Buddha and of Ananda, his favorite disciple. Of course, in this case, it would be perfectly right to think it is a Buddhist vihara. Most probably, some of the Russian archaeologists will protest against the opinions I maintain, that is to say, the opinions of the Hindu archaeologists, and will treat me as an ignoramus, outraging science. In self-defense, and in order to show how unstable a ground to base one's opinion upon are the conclusions even of such a great authority of Mr. Ferguson, I must mention the following instance. This great architect, but very mediocre archaeologist, proclaimed at the very beginning of his scientific career that all the cave temples of Kanara, K-A-N-A-R-A, without exception were built between the 5th and 10th centuries. This theory became generally accepted when suddenly Dr. Bird found a brass plate in a certain Kanara monument called a tope, T-O-P-E. The plate announced in pure and distinct Sanskrit that this tope was erected as an homage to the old temple at the beginning of 245 of the Hindu astronomical, in brackets, Samvat, S-A-M-V-A-T, era. According to Prinsep, P-R-I-N-S-E-P, and Dr. Stevenson, this date coincides with 189 A.D., and so it clearly settles the question of when the tope was built. But the question of the antiquity of the temple itself still remains open, though the inscription states that it was an old temple in 189 A.D., 189 A.D., and contradicts the above-quoted opinion of Ferguson. However, this important discovery failed to shake Ferguson's equanimity. For him, ancient inscriptions are of no importance because, he says, the antiquity of ruins must not be fixed on the basis of inscriptions, but on the basis of certain architectural canons and rules discovered by Mr. Ferguson in person. Fiat, hypothesis, ruat, culin. Okay, let me spell each word in that sentence. F-I-A-T, H-Y-P-O-T-H-E-S-I-S, comma, R-U-A-T, C-O-E-L-U-M. I have no idea what that means. Fiat, hypothesis, ruat, column. And now I shall return to my narrative. Straight before the entrance, a door leads to another hall, which is oblong with hexagonal pillars and niches containing statues in a tolerable state of preservation. Goddesses 10 feet and gods 9 feet tall. High. After this hall, there's a room with an altar, which is a regular hexagon, having having sides each 3 feet long and protected by a cupola cut in the rock. Nobody was admitted here except the initiates of the mysteries of the Adytum, A-D-Y-T-U-M. All around this room there are about 20 priest cells. Absorbed in the examination of the altar, we did not notice the absence of the colonel till we heard his loud voice in the distance calling to us, "I have found a secret passage. Come along. Let us find where it leads to." Torch in hand, the colonel was far ahead of us and very eager to proceed, but each of us had a little plan of his own, and so we were reluctant to obey his summons. The Babu took upon himself to answer for the whole party. "Take care, Colonel. This passage leads to the den of glamour. Mind the tigers." But once fairly started on the way to discoveries, our president was not to be stopped. Nolens volens, we followed him. He was right. He had made a discovery, and on entering the cell, we saw a most unexpected tableau. By the opposite wall stood two torchbearers with their flaming torches, as motionless as if they were transformed into stone caryatides, caryatides, caryatides. And from the wall, about 5 feet above the ground, protruded two legs clad in white trousers. There was no body to them. The body had disappeared. But that the legs were shaken by a convulsive effort to move on, we might have thought that the wicked goddess of this place had cut the colonel into two halves, and having caused the upper half instantly to evaporate, had struck the lower half to the wall as kind of a trophy. "What has become of you, Mr. President? Where are you?" were our alarmed questions. Instead of an answer, the legs were convulsed still more violently, and soon disappeared completely, after which we heard the voice of the colonel, as if coming through a long tube. "A room, a secret cell, be quick. I see a whole row of rooms. Confound it, my torch is out. Bring some matches and another torch." But this was easier said than done. The torchbearers refused to go on, and they were already frightened out of their wits. Miss X glanced with apprehension at the wall, thickly covered with soot, and then at her pretty gown. Mr. Y sat down on a broken pillar and said he could go no farther, preferring to have a quiet smoke in the company of the timid torchbearers. There were several vertical steps cut in the wall, and on the floor we saw a large stone of such a curiously irregular shape that it struck us that it could not be natural. The quick-eyed Babu was not long in discovering its peculiarities, and said he was sure it was the stopper, stopper, of the secret passage. We all hurried to examine the stone most minutely, and discovered that, though it imitated as closely as possible the irregularity of the rock, its undersurface bore evident traces of workmanship and had a kind of hinge to be easily removed. The hole was about 3 feet high, but no more than 2 feet wide. The muscular God's warrior, in quotes, God's warrior, the muscular God's warrior, was the first to follow the colonel. He was so tall that when he stood on the broken pillar at the opening, came down to the middle of his breast, and so he had no difficulty in transporting himself to the upper story. The slender Babu joined him in a single monkey-like jump. Then, with Akali, A-K-A-L-I, pulling from above, and Narayan pushing from below, I safely made the passage through the narrowness of the hole. Proved most disagreeable, and the roughness of the rock left considerable traces on my hands. However trying archaeological explorations may be for a person afflicted by an unusually fine presence, I felt perfectly confident with two such Hercules-like helpers as Narayan and Ram Runjit Das. The ascent of the Himalayas would have been perfectly possible for me. Miss X came next under the escort of Mulji, M-U-L-J-I, but Mr. Y stayed behind. The secret cell was a room of 12 feet square. Straight above the black hole in the floor, there was another in the ceiling, but this time we did not discover any stopper. The cell was perfectly empty with the exception of black spiders as big as crabs. Our apparition, and especially the bright light of the torches, it maddened them. Panic-stricken, they ran in hundreds over the walls, rushed down and tumbled on our heads, tearing their thin ropes with their inconsiderable haste. The first movement of Miss X was to kill as many as she could, but the 4 Hindus protested strongly and unanimously. The old lady remonstrated in an offended voice. I thought that at least you, Mulji, were a reformer, but you are as superstitious as any idol worshipper. Above everything, I am a Hindu, answered the mute general, and the Hindus, as you know, consider it sinful before nature and before their own consciences to kill an animal put to flight by the strength of man, be it even poisonous. As to the spiders, in spite of their ugliness, they are perfectly harmless. I am sure all this is because you think you will transmigrate into a black spider, she replied, her nostrils trembling with anger. I cannot say I do, replied Mulji, but if all the English ladies were as unkind as you, I should rather be a spider than an Englishman. This lively answer, coming from a usually taciturn Mulji, was so unexpected that we could not help laughing. But to our great discomfiture, Miss X was seriously angry, and under pretext of giddiness, said she would rejoin Mr. Y below. Her constant bad spirits were becoming trying for our cosmopolitan little party, and so we did not press her to stay. As to us, we climbed through the second opening, but this time under the leadership of Narayan. He disclosed to us that this place was not new to him. He had been here before, and he confided to us that similar rooms, one on top of the other, go on to the summit of the mountain. And then, he said, they take a sudden turn and descend gradually to a whole underground palace, which is sometimes temporarily inhabited. Wishing to leave the world for a while and to spend a few days in isolation, the Raj yogis find perfect solitude in this underground abode. Our president looked askance at Narayan through his spectacles, but did not find anything to say. The Hindus also received this information in perfect silence. A second cell was exactly like the first one. We easily discovered the hole in the ceiling and reached the third cell. There we sat down for a while. I felt that breathing was becoming difficult for me, but I thought I was simply out of breath and tired, and so I did not mention to my companions that anything was wrong. The passage to the fourth cell was almost stopped by earth mixed with little stones, and the gentlemen of the party were busy clearing it out for about 20 minutes. Then we reached the fourth cell. Narayan was right. The cells were one straight above the other, and the floor of the one formed the ceiling of the other. The fourth cell was in ruins. 2 broken pillars, lying one on the other, presented a very convenient stepping stone to the 5th story, but the colonel stopped our zeal by saying that now was the time to smoke the pipe of deliberation, after the fashion of Red Indians. If Narayan is not mistaken, he said, this going up and up may continue till tomorrow morning. I am not mistaken, said Narayan almost solemnly, but since my visit here I have heard that some of these passages are filled with earth, so that every communication is stopped, and if I remember rightly, we cannot go further than the next story. In that case, there's no use to try to go any further. If the ruins are so shaky as to stop the passages, it would be dangerous for us. I never said the passages were stopped by the hand of time. They did it on purpose. Who they? Do you mean Glamour? Colonel, said the Hindu with an effort, don't laugh at what I say. I speak seriously. My dear fellow, I assure you my intention is neither to offend you nor to ridicule a serious matter. I simply do not realize whom you mean when you say they. I mean the Brotherhood, the Raj Yogis. Some of them live quite close to here. By the dim light of the half-extinguished torches, we saw that Narayan's lips trembled and that his face grew pale as he spoke. The colonel coughed, rearranged his spectacles, and remained silent for a while. My dear Narayan, at last said the colonel, I do not want to believe that your intention is to make fun of our credulity, but I can't believe either that you seriously mean to assure us that any living creature, be it an animal or an aesthetic, could exist in a place where there is no air. I paid special attention to the fact, and so I am perfectly sure I am not mistaken. There is not a single bat in these cells, which shows that there is a lack of air. Just look at our torches. You see how dim they're glowing? I'm sure that on climbing 2 or 3 more rooms like this, we should be suffocated. And in spite of all these facts, I speak the truth, repeated Narayan. The caves further on are inhabited by them. I have seen them with my own eyes. The colonel grew thoughtful and stood glancing at the ceiling in a perplexed and undecided way. We all kept silent, breathing heavily. Let us go back, suddenly shouted Akali. My nose is bleeding. At that very moment I felt a strange and unexpected sensation, and I sank heavily to the ground. In a second I felt an indescribably delicious, heavenly sense of rest, in spite of a dull pain beating in my temples. I vaguely realized that I had really fainted, and that I should die if not taken out into the open air. I could not lift a finger, I could not utter a sound, and in spite of it, there was no fear in my soul, nothing but an apathetic and indescribably sweet feeling of rest, and a complete inactivity of all the senses except hearing. A moment came when even this sense forsook me, because I remember that I listened with imbecile intentness to the dead silence around me. Is this death? Was my indistinct wondering thought. Oh, is this death? Was my indistinct wondering thought. Then I felt as if mighty wings were fanning me. Kind wings, caressing, kind wings, were the recurring words in my brain, like the regular movements of a pendulum, and interiorly, under an unreasoning impulse, I laughed at these words. Then I experienced a new sensation. I rather knew than felt that I was lifted from the floor and fell down and down some unknown precipice amongst the hollow rollings of a distant thunderstorm. Suddenly a loud voice resounded near me, and this time I did not hear but felt it. There was something palpable in this voice, something that instantly stopped my helpless descent and kept me from falling any further. This was a voice I knew well, but whose voice it was, I could not in my weakness remember. In what way I was dragged through all these narrow holes will remain an eternal mystery for me. I came to myself on the veranda below, fanned by fresh breezes, and as suddenly as I had fainted above in the impure air of the cell. When I recovered completely, the first thing I saw was a powerful figure clad in white with a raven-black Rajput beard, anxiously leaning over me. As soon as I recognized the owner of this beard, I could not abstain from expressing my feelings by a joyful exclamation. "Where did you come from?" It was our friend Thakur Gulab Lal Singh, who, having promised to join us in the northwest provinces, now appeared to us in Bagh, as if falling from the sky or coming out of the ground. But my unfortunate accident and the pitiable state of the rest of the daring explorers were enough to stop any further questions and expressions of astonishment. On one side of me, the frightened Miss X, using my nose as a cork for her sal volatile bottle. On the other, the god's warrior, covered with blood as if returning from a battle with the Afghans. Further on, poor Mulji, with a dreadful headache. Narajan and the colonel, happily for our party, did not experience anything worse than slight vertigo. As to Babu, no carbonic acid gas could inconvenience his wonderful Bengali nature. He said he was safe and comfortable enough, but awfully hungry. At last the outpour of entangled exclamations and unintelligible explanations stopped. Let me start that sentence again. At last the outpour of entangled exclamations and unintelligible explanations stopped, and I collected my thoughts and I tried to understand what had happened to me in the cave. Narayan was the first to notice that I had fainted, and hastened to drag me back to the passage. And this very moment they all heard the voice of Gulab Singh coming from the upper cell. And here's a sentence in a different language, which I'm going to read phonetically, and then I'll spell for you. Tamhara iha aneka kia kam tha. TUM-HAREIHA ANEKA KYA KAM THA. What on earth brought you here? Even before they recovered from their astonishment, he quickly ran past them. Descending to the cell beneath, he called to them to pass him down the Bai, B-A-I, sister. This passing down of such a solid object as my body and the picture of the proceeding, vividly imagined, made me laugh heartily, and I felt sorry that I had not been able to witness it. Handing him over their half-dead load, they hastened to join the Thakur, T-A-K-U-R, but he contrived to do without their help, though how he did it they were at a loss to understand. By the time they succeeded in getting through one passage, Gulab Singh was already at the next one, in spite of the heavy burden he carried, and they never were in time to be of any assistance to him. The colonel, whose main feature is the tendency to go into the details of everything, could not conceive by what proceedings the Thakur had managed to pass my almost lifeless body so rapidly through all these narrow holes. He could not have thrown her down the passage before going in himself, for every single bone of her body would have been broken, mused the colonel, and it is still less possible to suppose that, descending first himself, he dragged her down afterwards. It's simply incomprehensible. These questions harassed him for a long time afterwards, until they became something like the puzzle, which was created first, the egg or the bird. As to Thakur, when closely questioned, he shrugged his shoulders and answered that he did not really remember. He said that he simply did whatever he could to get me out into the open air, and that all our traveling companions were there to watch his proceedings. He was under their eyes all the time, and that in circumstances when every second is precious, people do not think but act. But all these questions arose only in the course of the day. As to the time directly after, I was laid down on the veranda, and there were other things to puzzle all our party. No one could understand how the Thakur happened to be on the spot exactly when his help was most needed. nor where he came from, and everyone was anxious to know. On the veranda they found me lying on a carpet, with the Thakur busily restoring me to my senses, and Miss X, with her eyes wide open at the Thakur, whom she decidedly believed to be a materialized ghost. However, the explanations our friend gave us seemed perfectly satisfactory, and at first did not strike us as unnatural. He was in Hardwar when Swami Dayanand sent us the letter which postponed our going to him. On arriving at Kandua by the Indore Railroad, he had visited Holkar, Holkar, and learning that we were so near, he decided to join us sooner than he had expected. He had come to Bagh yesterday evening, and knowing that we were to start for the caves early in the morning, he went there before us and was simply waiting for us in the caves. "There is the whole mystery for you," he said. "The whole mystery?" exclaimed the colonel. "Did you know then beforehand that we would discover the cells, or what?" "No, I did not. I simply went there myself because it's a long time since I last saw them. Examining them took me longer than I expected, and so I was too late to meet you at the entrance." Probably the Thakur Sahib was enjoying the freshness of the air in the cells, suggested the mischievous Babu, showing all his white teeth in a broad grin. Our president uttered an energetic exclamation. "Exactly. How on earth did I not think of that before? You could not possibly have any breathing air in the cells above the one that you found us in, and besides, how did you reach the fifth cell when the entrance to the fourth was nearly stopped and we had to dig it out?" "There are other passages leading to them, and I know all the turns and corridors of these caves, and everyone is free to choose his way," answered the Gulab Singh. And I thought I saw a look of intelligence pass between him and Narayan, who simply cowered under his fiery eyes. "However, let us go to the cave where breakfast is ready for us. Fresh air will do all of us good." On our way, we met with another cave, 20 or 30 steps south of the veranda, but the Thakur did not let us go in, fearing new accidents for us. So we descended the stone steps I'd already mentioned, and after descending about 200 steps towards the foot of the mountain, made a short reascent again and entered the dining room in quotes, as the Babu denominated it. In my role of interesting invalid, in quotes, interesting invalid, I was carried to it, sitting in my folding chair, which never left me in all my travels. This temple is much the less gloomy of the two, in spite of considerable signs of decay. The frescoes of the ceiling are much better preserved than in the first temple. The walls, the tumble-down pillars, the ceiling, and even the interior rooms, which were lighted by ventilators cut through the rock, were once covered by a varnished stucco, the secret of which is now known only to the madrasas, which gives the rock the appearance of pure marble. We were met by the Thakur's 4 servants, whom we remembered since our stay in Karli, and who bowed down in the dust to greet us. The carpets were spread and the breakfast was ready. Every trace of carbonic acid had left our brains, and we sat down to our meal in the best of spirits. Our conversation soon turned to the Hardwar Mela, which our unexpectedly recovered friend had left exactly 5 days ago. All the information we got from Gulab Lal Singh was so interesting that I wrote it down at the first opportunity. After a few weeks, we visited Hardwar ourselves, and since I saw it in my memory, it has never grown tired. My memory has never grown tired of recalling the charming picture of its lovely situation. It is as near the primitive picture of earthly paradise as anything that can be imagined. Every 12th year, which the Hindus call Kumbha, Kumbha, the planet Jupiter enters its constellation of Aquarius, and this event is considered very propitious for the beginning of the religious fair, for which this day is accordingly fixed by the astrologers of the pagodas. This gathering attracts the representatives of all sects, as I said before, from princes and maharajas down to the last fakir. The former came for the sake of religious discussions, the latter simply to plunge into the waters at the Ganges, at its very source, which must be done at a certain propitious hour, fixed also by the position of the stars. Ganges, Ganges, is a name invented in Europe. The natives always say Ganga, Ganga, with the circumflex over the A, and consider this river to belong strictly to the feminine sex. Ganga is sacred in the eyes of the Hindus because she is the most important of all fostering goddesses of the country and a daughter of the old Himavat, Himavat, in brackets, Himalaya, from whose heart she springs for the salvation of the people. That is why she is worshipped, and that is why the city of Hardwar, built at her very source, is so sacred. Hardwar is written Haridvara, Hari-Dvara, with a circumflex over the A. The doorway of the sun god, or Krishna, is also often called Ganga Dvara. And the doorway of Ganga. Let me read the sentence again. All right. Hardwar is written Hari Dvara, the doorway of the sun god, or Krishna, and is often called Ganga Dvara, the doorway of Ganga. There is still a third name of the same town, which is the name of a certain ascetic Kapila, or rather Kapila, Kapila, who once sought salvation on this spot and left many miraculous traditions. The town is situated in a charming flowery valley at the foot of the southern slope of the Sivalik, Sivalik ridge between two mountain chains. In this valley, raised 1,024 feet above sea level, the northern nature of the Himalayas struggles with the tropical growth of the plains. And in their efforts to excel each other, they have created the most delightful of all the delightful corners of India. The town itself is a quaint collection of castle-like turrets, of the most fantastical architecture, of ancient viharas, of wooden fortresses so gaily painted that they look like toys, of pagodas with loopholes and overhanging curved little balconies, and all this overgrown by such abundance of flowers, dahlias, aloes, and blossoming cacti that it is hardly possible to tell a door from a window. The granite foundations of many houses are laid almost in the bed of the river, and so during 4 months of the year they are half covered with water. And behind this handful of scattered houses, higher up the mountain slope, crowd snow-white, stately temples. Some of them are low, with thick walls, wide wings, and gilded cupolas. Others rise in majestical, many-storied towers. Others again with shapely pointed roofs, which look like the spars of a bell tower. Strange and capricious is the architecture of these temples, the like of which is not to be seen anywhere else. They look as if they'd suddenly drop from the snowy abodes of the mountain spirits above, standing there in the shelter of the mother mountain and timidly peeking over the head of the small town below at their own images reflected in the pure, untroubled waters of the sacred rivers. Here the Ganges is not yet polluted by the dirt and the sins of her many million adorers. Releasing her worshippers, cleansed from her icy embrace, the pure maiden of the mountains carries her transparent waves through the burning plains of Hindustan, and only 348 miles lower down, on passing through Kanpur, Cawnpore, do her waters begin to grow thicker and darker, while on reaching Benares, they transform themselves into a kind of peppery pea soup. Once, while talking to an old Hindu who tried to convince us that his compatriots are the cleanest nation in the world, we asked him, why is it then, in the less populous places, the Ganges is pure and transparent, while in Benares, especially towards evening, it looks like a mass of liquid mud? "Oh, Sahibs," answered he mournfully, "it is not the dirt of our bodies, as you think. It is not even the blackness of our sins that the Devi, in brackets goddess, washes away. Her waves are black with the sorrow and the shame of her children. Her feelings are sad and sorrowful. Hidden suffering, burning pain and humiliation, despair and shame at her own helplessness have been her lot for many centuries. She has suffered all this till her waters have become waves of black bile. Her waters are poisoned and black, but not from physical causes. She is our mother, and how could she help resenting the degradation we have brought ourselves to in this dark age?" This sorrowful, poetical allegory made us feel very keenly for the poor old man. But however great our sympathy, we could not but suppose that probably the woes of the maiden Ganga do not affect her sources. In Hardwar, the color of the Ganges is crystal, aquamarina, and the waters run gaily murmuring to the shore reeds about the wonders they saw on their way from the Himalayas. The beautiful river is the greatest and the purest of goddesses in the eyes of the Hindus, and many are the honors given to her in Hardwar. Besides the Mela, celebrated once every 12 years, there is a month in every year where the pilgrims flock together to the Harika Para, Harika-Paira, stairs of Vishnu. Whosoever succeeds in throwing himself first into the river at the appointed day, hour, and moment will not only expiate all his sins, but will also have all bodily sufferings removed. This zeal to be the first is so great that owing to a badly constructed and narrow stair leading to the water, it used to cost many lives yearly until 1819. The East India Company, taking pity upon the pilgrims, ordered this ancient relic to be removed and a new stairway, 100 feet wide and consisting of 60 steps, to be constructed. The month when the waters of the Ganges are most salutary falls, according to the Brahmanical computation, between March 12th and April 10th, and is called Chaitra, Chaitra. The worst of it is that the waters are at their best only at the first moment of a certain propitious hour indicated by the Brahmins, and which sometimes happens to be midnight. You can fancy what it must be when this moment comes in the midst of a crowd which exceeds 2 millions. In 1819, more than 400 people were crushed to death. But even after the new stairs were constructed, the goddess Ganga has carried away on her virgin bosom many a disfigured corpse of her worshippers. Nobody pitied the drowned. On the contrary, they were envied. Whoever happened to be killed during the purification by bathing is sure to go straight to Swarga, Swarga, in brackets, heaven. In 1760, the two rival brotherhoods of Sannyasis and Vairagyas had a regular battle amongst them on the sacred day of Purbi, Purbi, and the last day of the religious fair. The Vairagyas were conquered, and there were 18,000 people slaughtered. And in 1796, proudly narrated our warlike friend, the Akali, the pilgrims from Punjab, all of them Sikhs, desiring to punish the insolence of the Hossains, Hossains, killed here about 500 of these heathens. My own grandfather took part in that fight. Later on, we verified this in the Gazette of India, and the God's warrior was cleared of every suspicion of exaggeration and boasting. In 1879, however, no one was drowned or crushed to death, but a dreadful epidemic of cholera broke out. We were disgusted at this impediment, but had to keep at a distance in spite of our impatience to see hardware, and unable to behold distant summits of old Himavat ourselves, we had in the meantime to be contented with what we could hear about him from other people. So we talked long after our breakfast under the cave. Vault was finished. Under the cave vault was finished. No. So we talked long after our breakfast. Under the cave vault was finished. But our talk was not so gay as it might have been, because we had to part with Ram Ranjit Das, who was going to Bombay. The worthy Sikh shook hands with us in the European way, and then, raising his right hand, gave us his blessing after the fashion of the followers of Nanaka. But when he approached the Thakur to take leave of him, his countenance suddenly changed. This change was so evident that we all noted it. The Thakur was sitting on the cushion, leaning on a saddle which served him as a cushion, and the Akali did not attempt either to give him his blessing or to shake hands with him. The proud expression of his face also changed and showed confusion and anxious humility instead of the usual self-respect and self-sufficiency. The brave Sikh knelt down before Thakur, and instead of the ordinary Namaste, salutation to you, whispered reverently, as if addressing the Guru of the Golden Lake, I am your servant, Sadhu Sahib. Give me your blessing. Without any apparent reason or cause, we all felt self-conscious and ill at ease, as if guilty of some indiscretion. But the face of the mysterious Rajput remained as calm and dispassionate as ever. He was looking at the river before this scene took place, slowly moved his eyes to the Akali, who lay prostrated before him. Then he touched the head of the Sikh with his index finger, and he rose with the remark that we had better start at once because it was getting late. We drove in our carriage, moving very slowly because of the deep sand which covered all this locality, and the Thakur followed us on horseback all the way back. He told us the epic legends of the Hardwar and Rajasthan, and the great deeds of the Hari Kulas, and the epic princes of the solar race. Hari, Hari, means son, and Kula, Kula, family. Some of the Rajput princes belonged to this family, and the Maharanas and the Udaipur, Oodeypur, are especially proud of their astronomical origin. The name of Hari Kula gives to some Orientalists ground to suppose that a member of this family emigrated to Egypt in the remote epoch of the first pharaonic dynasties, and that the ancient Greeks, borrowing the name as well as the traditions, thus formed their legends about mythological Hercules. It is believed that the ancient Egyptians adored the Sphinx under the name of Hari Mukh, Hari-Mukh, or the sun on the horizon. On the mountain chain which fringes Kashmir on the north, 13,000 feet above the sea, there is a huge summit, which is exactly like a head, and which bears the name of Hari Mukh. This name is also met in the most ancient of the Puranas. Besides, popular tradition considers this Himalayan stone head to be the image of the setting sun. Is it possible, then, that all these coincidences are only accidental? And why is it that the Orientalists will not give it more serious attention? It seems to me that this is rich soil for future research, and that it is no more to be explained by mere chance than the fact that both Egypt and India held the cow sacred, and that the ancient Egyptians had the same religious horror of killing certain animals as modern Hindus. And that concludes that chapter. The next chapter is called An Isle of Mystery, and that's the last chapter of this book. So we just concluded the second last chapter of this book. And let me just say, I hope you're really enjoying this. I certainly am. I think this is a marvelous book, a marvelous adventure. And, you know, I've been interested in Madame Blavatsky for a long time. And so this really kind of rounds out a lot of the information I had for her before. I hope you like the picture that I'm going to put up for you to look at of these caves. And, yeah. Okay, till soon.